On the podcast today, we are going to dissect Chapter 12 of the Tao Te Ching, which makes up the 12th episode of the 81 Meditations of the Tao Te Ching. And this is a wonderful chapter where Lao Tzu dives deep into the nature of desires. And so we actually have three different translations today. We have the Jia Fu Feng translation, we have the Derek Lin translation, and we also have added the Philip J. Ivanhoe translation because his translation is wonderful. So first we'll run with the Jia Fu Feng translation.
Okay. The 5 colors blind the eye. The 5 tones deafen the ear. The 5 flavors dull the taste. Racing and hunting madden the mind. Precious things leads us astray. Therefore, the wise are guided by what they feel and not by what they see. Letting go of that and choosing this.
Excellent. Derek Lynch translation. The 5 colors make one blind in the eyes. The 5 sounds make one deaf in the ears. The 5 flavors make one tasteless in the mouth. Racing and hunting make one wild in the heart. Goods that are difficult to acquire make one cause damage. Therefore the sages care for the stomach and not the eyes. That is why they discarded the other and take this. And Philip J. Ivanhoe's translation is, the 5 colors blind our eyes, the 5 notes deafen our ears, the 5 flavors deaden our palates, the chase and the hunt madden our hearts. Precious goods impede our activities. This is why sages are for the belly and not for the eye, and so they cast off one and take up the other, which is very important. And so, as with other chapters, we need to explain some certain cultural traits of the time, because we have 5 here, and 5, you could replace 5 with extravagant or fancy, because 5 represents, all colors and this and that, but it
Yes.
does have a cultural significance, doesn't it?
Yes, of course. You instantly be curious about why is it 5 instead of 6, 7, 8, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Again, so like you said, this number 5 is captured that culture of the time of the ancient China. So again, the 5 colors here being blue, yellow, red, white, and black in specifically. And the 5 tones or 5 notes are here C, D, E, G, A. So only 5 tones. Usually in the Western classical music we have 7 notes. So these 5 notes are without B and F. So it makes up 5 tones. And the 5 flavors here are sour, salty, sweet, spicy, and bitter. And again, we can't skip the 5 elements in Chinese medicine as well, which are earth, fire, water, metal, and wood. So this number 5 indicates something like specific elements within any Chinese knowledge or study in cultural aspect as well. So the ancient China had this tendency to divide into 5 things to explain something. Yeah, so that's why the number 5 became very significant in this chapter.
Yeah. Well, 5 significant also in Indian culture too, right? So it's kind of
almost identical.
Identical, yeah. It's like an Eastern philosophical trait almost. But in China, they did have, as you mentioned, a lot of things dissected into 5.
Yeah.
But as you're alluding to, like it's more metaphorical than anything. It represents all flavors, and it represents kind of the heart of this chapter, which is about this dissection between artificial desires as opposed to natural desires, right? Which is what Lao Tzu's trying to explain.
Yeah, definitely. These all 5 colors, tones, and flavors are to represent what could pollute our eyes and the ears, right? How these things can stimulate our senses so that our desires get to have a kind of out of our control.
Yeah. So the premise of the chapter is that the sages, they stick to the desires of the belly, right? And us mere mortals, we get swept up in the desires of the eye.
Yes.
And the desires of the eye are the artificial needs created by socialization itself.
Yes.
And so
Yeah, again, the racing state of mind is that sort of condition of the mental agitation, right? Again, like in Buddhism, they say it's monkey mind as well. And
Yes.
also, like a Buddhist term, they say samsaric, like samsaric or deluded mind.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, so that we always agitated and affected by and influenced by this outside culture, outside noise, basically.
Exactly. And yeah, that's what the artificial desires are, right? Like, so they are these needs that are created by the society that confuse the average Joe into thinking that, well, we need to follow that sort of way of thinking or these desires. Like if we use the American dream, right, as an example, especially in America, which, the American dream has kind of left the shores of America. It's everywhere, right? Australia and this and that. There's all of this idea of the American dream. And, we ought to chase this. And like you said, with the chase and the hunt, we burn ourselves out in the process of doing it. And Lao Tzu recognized this back in the Warring States period of China. I mean, if he was alive now, he'd be choking on his coffee, that's for sure, because if he saw what's going on now.
Yeah.
But back in ancient China, with all of the socialization that Confucius was imposing on everyone with his philosophy, you had this to become like a superior man, a gentleman, you had to, be in the grind. You had to chase a hunt. You had to apply yourself to the Confucian rules and regulations to be a pious individual.
Yes.
And so you burn yourself out, you burn your spirit out, because these are artificial needs created by an artificial system, which create, in turn, artificial people. So, and that, if we take what was going on back in the Warring States period to now, what that would be pop culture. That's what pop culture is.
Because that was what was contemporary back then, right?
Exactly. They talk about the glib, right? The glib in the Warring States period was this kind of way of music, way of dressing, so you could kind of think about that with pop culture, right? There's this way of music which is very artificial, and way of dressing which is all not based on anyone's intrinsic desire, but is actually driven by the pop culture, driven by these fake musicians that are actually just a product of the music industry that drive the psychology, particularly of younger people, unfortunately.
I find it quite interesting that, so you are constantly in a process of warping its own nature, right? So you try to shape in a certain way and polishing in a certain way to become something great, right? Or to do something amazing things. But in the end, you are actually warping its original nature, so that you kind of completely miss the point there, right? I mean, since we're mentioning the pop culture, I like to mention the wokeism a little bit here. Like woke ideology also, it's been moved and swept up by our culture of today, I think. And people easily get persuaded by that ideology only because, not because they really follow it, only because that's what other people say and what other people think is correct, and that it had become kind of a cultural thing. So they dress up in a very peculiar way and things like they want to, look in certain way and things like that. That it's purely because you got influenced by this pop culture, right? And I think this ideology taken big part of it as well. That's why it just last few years especially really became big, because just like a pop culture.
Yeah. Well, since the pandemic, I think, and wokeism is driven by liberal academia, right? Like it's not wokeism is a destruction of common sense, and And to be frank, it is really a minority, even though it's pushed on a lot of people. It is a minority. A lot of people actually know that. But for whatever reason, and there's a lot of things to this, and probably there's a lot of conspiracies around this as well, but why certain companies fall in line with liberal academia's sort of destruction of common sense. And so, which is causing actually a lot of, a lot of confusion in the world, because not many people are in tone with that sort of lack of common sense, obviously. And so then you create, stupidity in the world, where you can't even use the word woman, for example. And so that's where you're in a real dangerous territory, and that's when you see humanity slip into a state of insanity. And so, Lao Tzu would just laugh his head off if he saw woke ideology, because it's completely unnatural.
Yes.
You're not following the way of nature. You're dressing yourself up a certain way. You're colouring your hair pink all the time. There's all of these things which are completely unnatural to fit the mold of what Facebook promote, or what the big tech companies and George Soros supports, So, which again, as I said, and most people know this, it's such a minority. Just walk out your door, most people are normal.
Yes.
And most people don't actually need to get attention from other people. They prefer not to get attention from other people, so they don't need to dress themselves up. A lot of it's about insecurity, and that's the fact of the matter. A lot of that pop culture is about insecurity, about, and they talk about this in psychology, where the self-esteem problems that people have is often found in people who try to be famous, because they have a self-esteem issue. They need to be famous to try and boost their self-esteem up. Where obviously Lao Tzu and Zhuangzi would just laugh their head off and say, you have to be naturally comfortable with who you are.
Exactly.
A society can't define you. A culture can't define you. A race can't define you. A nation can't define you. What is your original face before you were born? Which is the Zen philosophy, right?
So once when you allow outside world, society and culture dictate your way of thinking, then you are completely becoming disingenuous individual.
Yes.
So that you become this a inauthentic personality, right? And also that creates kind of fake sincerity as well.
Yes.
And that fake sincerity is people often become blind to it, I think, because that's what culture promoting it.
Yes.
So as long as what is mainstream media, mainstream social media as well, are promoting, you just blindly believe that's right, right? That is why, like you said, it's a death of common sense nowadays. And I find it funny that we find this from a younger generation. Why don't we, if that this new woke ideology was to have some plausible reasoning, then why aren't older people also get buy into it, right? So that's why I think it's just a completely new phenomenon, and that is why only younger generations getting into these things, and they defend these new culture. Yeah.
Well, everything's upside down now, right? Like when I mentioned liberal academia, right? They're not really liberal. They're pretty conservative these days. So when you mention progressive, you mean conservative. When you mention conservative, you mention progressive. Because that's really what's going on. Because progressive ideology is not to destroy common sense. Real progressive ideology, I mean, and real liberalism is not to destroy common sense. That doesn't make any sense. That doesn't contribute to the evolution of the human species. The reason why we are here now with the world that we have, and in some sense, if we look at Joseph Heinrich's work, the success we've become as a species, which is you should actually be optimistic about it, is because we've built on other cultures of the past, And we're trying to burn that down in one generation. The youth are, I mean, in some sense, which is supported by the universities and this and that, who are forcing, unfortunately, professors and people that work in the industry to follow this line, even though no one really supports it.
Yes.
And so what's really strange is that it keeps going on. I mean, I think that it's eventually going to collapse in on itself because people will just stop. I mean, other universities and that will arise. It's just what happens. You know, if you're going to get forced into a certain way of thinking, which is what Confucius did back in the day, then people just walk away. And they go and create their own universities, their own, based on common sense, based on, let's give everyone a crack. And university is a place where those who are the most intelligent will succeed. It doesn't matter about anything else. But the universities have gone with a whole different model.
Yes.
And their idea of inclusivity is exclusive.
Oh, yeah.
Which is the fact of the matter. They say they are inclusive, but they are exclusive. And that's a fact. Mm-hmm. And if you disagree with that, that means that you yourself are a victim of their promotion of this lack of common sense. And so Lao Tzu, and like you and I, we have no qualms with calling a spade when we see BS. And so that's all Lao Tzu did back in the day. Right. He called BS on Confucius anxiously going around the country trying to change people according to his philosophy, making women bind their feet, telling you should sleep in a certain way because you're a minister, or you name the amount of stupidity that he was trying to implement at that point in time.
Yes. And what's going on around the world right now, I feel like almost at the highest and maximized degree of this, the desires of the eye.
Yeah,
I think.
no doubt.
Because purely, pretty much a majority of individuals driven by, as you mentioned earlier, fame and wealth and success, right? And they volunteer to let them dictate their life. Yes. And they allow themselves to enslave to these artificial, superficial values, right? Yep. And at the end of the day, you think, what happened to my life? Mm-hmm. They look back and, what the hell happened there?
Yeah, well, it wasn't genuine. You and I recently, and this is to speak to our point, we watched a documentary. We won't mention the name of the girl band, but they were a Korean K-pop band. And you and I know this. But again, a lot of people who are consumed with pop culture are ignorant. But there's a documentary out there about a famous K-pop girl band. And they've all had the surgery, they've all had their chin sawed off, and none of them can sing. They're coached to sing, but they basically work for the music label. Mm. And so they're a product of the music label. They hardly make any money. Well, they must make some money, right? But it's all going basically to the big dog in charge. And so it's not real art. It's manufactured art. It's not even art, right? Like, that's why when you listen to K-pop, it's poison to the ears. So it's manufactured art, and that's where we're at right now, right? So you even have art that is not genuine.
Yes.
And so Lao Tzu's point is, Taoism is always about being the genuine person, the genuine. 100%. And so, which is what Zhuangzi keeps harping on about, right? And so if you, like that girl band, they have been trained and nurtured, and even in the documentary, the guys say that they can't sing, so they're trying to coach them to sing half the time, and and then they do a little bit of machine work and make them sound at least okay, and so that's what you have, and so it becomes a vice, or it becomes a product just for money.
Yes,
and it's not about art itself, right? So. And look, even if we look in Hollywood right now, right? Hollywood, Quentin Tarantino actually said this best. Why Quentin gets criticized a lot, because Quentin's very genuine, right? Like, if he has something to say, he'll let you know. He will let you know.
He walked off this interview once.
Yeah. He'll let you know. When someone starts, wheeling out the political correctness BS and there's all this nonsense that's really binding just naturalness in the world. And again, Taoism is against political correctness because it's over analytical. That's a whole other story. But Quentin said it best, where he said that, unfortunately, in Hollywood now, art is confused with ideology. And so that restricts you from being an artist, right? The artist is kind of like a comedian, right? The comedian can just go out there and just say whatever the hell they want to say. Well, they're kind of constrained now too, but most comedians, most successful comedians, I should say, go out there and say whatever the hell they want to say. Ricky Gervais, Dave Chappelle, you name it, right? Those sorts of individuals. But if you're constraining your art because of the political correct crowd or this minority who go around cancelling people, and they are a minority, the wokesters, then you'll try to create your art within boundaries. And it won't inspire anyone. It'll just be the K-pop. That's all it will be. It'll be that K-pop version that becomes a product because that's what the big tech companies and academia are saying and the media organizations are saying is acceptable. But it's stupidity. It's not art. So, like, same with myself, like, writing, like, how can you say this and that when you're writing books? It's like, that's what comes out in my writing.
At the dawn of our time, the art came into place in the human histories only because to express our emotion, our life, and the beauty of nature and beauty of our emotions and human life itself, or
Yes.
whether that's sad or happy, or just altogether it's just beauty itself. And to be able to explain things into words, into painting or into music, into dancing, the stuff, things like that, right? That's why we created art, so that completely independent of the status quo, completely independent of political problem that's going on in at that time.
Yeah.
That's why when you look at, again, the counterculture movement was a perfect example. To counter culture, it happened, right?
Yes,
to counter that things that was happening at that time of the world and back in the 60s, right?
Yeah.
So when you look at from like 60s even to up to 90s, for that period of time, even obviously even before that as well, but especially we see in that period of time that a lot of artists comes out and be vocal about against what was happening around the world, right? Because they were free from political ideas and ideologies, and they were completely independent and secure in their own way of expressing their art, right? That's why it was very active, very creative, and the music and painting and writing, just name it.
Beautiful.
But now, again, art and creativity mixing with politics, as you said, it creates some funny boundaries so that it turns out really something unnatural, something not right about it, right?
Yeah. It's art through the lens of political correctness. And so it's not art. Art is supposed to be free like a bird. And that's how it should be expressed. So this with art is nothing new. As I mentioned, there was the glib back in the Warring States period of China. So Lao Tzu's going home every night shaking his head. Please. Because there was a certain way of music that came through that sort of Confucian culture, music and dance and etiquette. And, Lao Tzu's rugged, he's natural, and he's just like, please, 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 please. And then eventually he left, if we take the story true, right, of him really existing. So it's, again, so you are art or anything, right, that is influenced by pop culture is artificial. It's not natural. Like you said before with the counterculture movement, the way people freely expressed themselves in that time was because there was no sort of boundary about, so people were opposing the Vietnam War and there was a lot of real life problems back then. And so people were opposing those not really opposing, but expressing themselves and maybe their frustration
Yes.
and also the beauty as well of the time, right? That's why, especially in that period of time, there was Eastern spirituality became very popular. Alan Watts, Ram Dass, Shunro Suzuki, Daisetsu Suzuki, all of these amazing people. Joseph Campbell came through this time. Timothy Leary, you name it. We can just keep rolling them out
Going on and on.
on and on. And so they all came because new ideas needed to come. It wasn't a destruction of common sense. It wasn't like saying you can't say the word woman, like, which is completely stupid. It was about bringing in new ideas that can help us understand the time that we are existing in. And so a lot of people were against the Vietnam War, right? And so, because it wasn't a successful, I mean, there is no successful war, but in terms of wars, it was one of the least successful. There was not really an outcome.
Yes.
So people wanted something new to try and understand this crazy period of time. We came out of two horrific world wars. We had another new war. And so meditation and Eastern spirituality and that became popular. And thankfully, right? And so we are kind of bearing the fruit from that period of time. Everyone listening and watching, and you and I. You know, and so it's not that it is anything new, right? It happened in Confucius's time, but the focus is that you kind of have to turn in some sense, reject pop culture.
Yes.
Lao Tzu in this chapter is basically saying you need to reject pop culture. You need to reject the society that's trying to carve and polish you, self-cultivate you into its image.
Yes.
As you mentioned with the young and impressionable people these days who start to dress a particular way because certain companies promote that as being cool when it's not cool, you know. And so we have to, especially if you're a sincere Taoist, you have to reject that artificiality because you have to return to your way of nature. And you have to, in some sense, reject socialization, you know, because we've all endured a socialization process. And in Taoism is a technology to disentangle yourself from the socialization process, because that socialization process became your ego, became this artificial sense of self.
Yeah, I think the culture is the blueprint of what was happening and what is happening of that particular time, I think.
Yeah.
So that's how we can also look back in the 60s, 70s, 80s through what was happening politically and around the world, and also the cultural movement was the reaction of what was happening, right?
Yeah.
So culture being kind of blueprint of almost the history.
Mm-hmm.
So this time that we are going through also will become blueprint of the history. This culture will become blueprint of history in the future, in like a distant future, right?
Yeah, for sure.
So then you be able to look back at what was going on back then, right? Like it'd be a little bit
bit nutty.
Yeah.
Well, that's what a zeitgeist is, love. A zeitgeist
Yes.
means the culture of time.
Yes.
So, and I mentioned Tarantino before. He mentioned in regards to movies that, because he said he's seen this before, this kind of nonsense that's going on now. And he said it happened throughout the decade of the 80s, where he said the 70s was very free, everything was cool, and then this political correctness started coming in because of certain people and companies driving towards it. And then there was a period of time, a zeitgeist, where Hollywood and the world went through this kind of period of, you know, things were constrained, art was constrained, but then people just, you know, had enough and started to just do their own thing, and then the 90s came. And so then we had a couple of decades there where it was, but then we throw in this snake in the grass, which is social media, and the companies that drive them, who have a particular agenda, which has been obviously exposed. And then, you know, we go through another phase of this, and it will end. Trust me, it will end, because common sense will always prevail. Yes. And I completely reject the destruction of common sense, because if you follow the way of nature, you cannot destroy common sense. So it makes no sense. Yes. That's your natural intuitive sense. So you're telling to destroy that to enhance your intellect. Your intellect only should be conservatively employed, It should not be the ruler of the house, you know. And so that's what all of this new political correctness movement, particularly through the woke ideologues, is being promoted. The destruction of your intuition and your enhancement of your intellect.
Yes.
And so it's like, but that's not how nature is. I know Guy's a woman. I'm not going to call her something different to suit your version of political correctness,
Right.
which is actually politically incorrect. So,
See how the logically it all comes around in full circle and bite its own tail, and I think that also could be something that what Confucius culture promotes as carving and polishing metaphor, right? So keep carving and keep polishing, almost until nothing left to polish or carve anymore. So then there is no point of doing all that, a lot of rigorous work, right? So again, you mentioned this in your article related to this, and Confucius' idea is that in talking about human beings, it's not human beings, it's human becoming. Because you have to constantly mold and shape in a certain way, depends on the change of society and change of culture. So that your original true nature, your pure nature, never will be able to expose and just fully be out and being itself, right?
Yep.
So a constant kind of becoming process. And again, that way of thinking assumes that our human nature is essentially intrinsically bad. But when you look at nature, is nature has such value of good or bad? There is no such value, right?
No.
Again, that's where then Lao Tzu coming in, so that uncarved wooden block, unhewn wooden block. So that, again, with that metaphor, you can say that instead of Confucius is being human becoming, Lao Tzu is more so like a human being. You're just being yourself, right?
yeah. And that's what we naturally use, right? When you say human being, we don't say, that's a human becoming over there. You go, no, that's a human being. It's a human being. Like when we refer to ourselves as being human, right? So, but actually when we apply it to people caught in socialization, we probably should say, hey, that's a human becoming over there. That's a human becoming that just walked past. Because they are constantly, like you said, they're in this process of trying to become something, and then the becoming doesn't end. You know, the becoming never ends. Never ends. Like you're constantly molding yourself, shaping yourself to suit what is beneficial or accepted by the socialization.
Exactly. Like in this line in the chapter 12 says that racing and hunting madden the mind. Literally, we
Turns you into a psychopath.
we give this kind of unconditional love, unconditional worship to these superficial values now, right? So that's already, haven't we gone far enough? Like how far do we really want to go down to that rabbit hole?
Have you seen out there?
I don't want to see. I don't want to be here.
You don't want to turn on the news, I can tell you. It's a real show.
Yes.
But exactly, how far do we want to go? And when you follow the way of nature, Taoism, or if you follow Vedanta or Buddhism or yoga or any of the great paths, it's about recognizing in your own life how you are caught up in the chase and the hunt. You know, so you recognize, like, oh man, my whole life is geared towards chasing a goal that I have, or chasing money I have, or tearing someone else down because they don't, you know, fall in line with my image of the world. And this is all part of the chase and the hunt, right? Where Lao Tzu just puts his hands up and says, just follow Wu Wei, man. Follow, you know, non-deliberate action. Free your heart, mind to wander the world. You know, there's a phrase actually in Chinese called Yushin, and Xin means heart, mind, but Yu means to wander, right? And so Yushin, as Zhuangzi alludes to, is we can carefree, in a carefree way we can wander the world without our mind and our heart being caught in this artificial game. So our heart, mind, our Yushin, being caught in this artificial game of socialization where you're completely free and at ease. And it really annoys people because people then start saying to you, like, but I want you to care about this. Why don't you care about it? And it's like, what's there to care about? I'm free.
Yes.
This is what freedom is. It's not freedom from, it's freedom itself is what Taoism's talking about. You're talking about freedom from something. There'll always be something to be free from in that mentality. Do you know freedom itself? And that's what Yushin is. Yushin is to free the heart mind, to wander the world, to not be caught by these traps of socialization, and particularly the traps are way more clever these days. So it's important for us to free ourselves. You know, in the first chapter of the Zhuang, there is free and easy wandering, right? And so to wander freely, not just roaming in the sense of roaming the world, but that's also, you know, that's beneficial as well. But to have a mind that's not bound by the artificial needs of society. So you can roam free. Your mind's not caught anywhere. It's like the unstuck mind in Zen, right? You are a living embodiment of liberation then.
Again, that's the lesson for how to live life, basically, isn't it? Like, instead of we trying to mold and shape in a certain way our own life to become something or achieve something, when you can just truly let life be, and your mind is not entangled with any socializations or social values you got indoctrinated by others or immediate society and culture, that once you can be completely free from all of those, then you can truly appreciate life as it is. And you will be truly able to see what life is really about, I think.
Yeah.
Because we want to control. We want to control like everything, like every single thing, right? And we want our life to be in a certain way. And once life becomes a certain way, that your way that you want it to be, then you think you're gonna be happy. But we know that's not the way.
No.
True freedom and true happiness itself comes from when you allow life just be, and if you are capable of being able to appreciate it, then I think you will be really able to see what life really is and what really life means to you, I think.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And that kind of leads us into the desires of the belly, right? It leads us into those natural desires that Lao Tzu talks about, like of the rejection of the artificial desires, the desires of the eye, and returning to the desires of the belly, as you're alluding to.
Yes.
So those basic needs, that simplicity, that simple life, and you know, as you were saying, like you were basically describing Wu Wei in a sense that with Wu Wei we let go and we let be. So we let go of ourself, of this ego that we think we are, and we also allow the world to be, which then is the medicine to induce freedom, real freedom.
Yes.
And so Lao Tzu's remedy for that is to revert back to the desires of the belly. So the basic needs that you need.
Yes.
You know, so food, clothing, shelter, having a good belly laugh. You know, they talk about belly laughs in Zen and Taoism a lot, you know. Like,
laughing yoga.
Yeah, you well, not really laughing yoga, but yeah, you know what I mean.
Kind of, yes.
Kind of, you know, like laughing out.
Practicing,
yeah. But not really, but not practicing, you know, like laughing out loud naturally like, about things, you know. So, basically the basic needs, right? So what nature gave you, and the needs, the basic needs that we have are quite modest when you think about it. They're not extravagant at all. They're modest, right? Like if you give me clothes, you know, shelter, food, I'm happy. You know, what more do you need?
I think like a little bit related to our food culture right now.
Yeah.
I think, I mean...
Yeah, definitely.
Because food had become very complicated, like too many different kind of sauces and all mix of flavors, and you just get used to that sort of taste.
Sugar.
Yeah, sugar and spicy, salty, sour, but all in a one plate, and you eat that and you feel that's delicious. But when you do a bit of fasting and you have a raw one stick of carrot or celery or something like that, no salt, nothing, just bare vegetable.
You're such a dry person.
Then once you have one bite, then you know, this is how carrot tastes like.
Yeah, that's right.
No salt, no pepper, nothing.
And how good does a carrot taste just on its own?
Exactly.
You know?
Then you can fully appreciate how nature really intended to.
Yeah.
Like, I think a little bit like that with what you were.
Definitely, it is. It definitely is. Food is a good example, like you mentioned. Like they talk about food porn now, right? Like food, because like it's the food that you see is kind of pornographic. I mean, not sexual, but like the stimulation. Like, oh, look at that cinnamon donut, or look at that
cinnamon donuts with some chocolate glaze.
Yeah. And then you're off down the rabbit hole, and you've got sugar all over your face, and you're wondering why you feel sluggish. And it's like, well, you just had to eat some natural food, but you ate that. And if we look at earlier Taoist cultures, there was and if we look at traditional Chinese medicine in general, like what's recommended to eat, foods are very bland. You know, there are certainly some spices and some meals and this and that, but in general they're very bland, because then you taste the natural aromas.
Yes.
You know, I remember once, maybe 11 years ago, you and I were staying in on some Aboriginal land in New South Wales, and you were making. We didn't have much food with us, but then you just made you've made it many times after this, obviously, but a vegetable soup with no sauces, this and that, just water and vegetables, and then there's the natural aroma of the vegetables, right? Like it, and it's kind of like a very Taoist meal, and so that sort of blandness is we don't really want that anymore. We want spices on top. We want sugar everywhere. Our tongues are, our palate is deadened, as Philip mentions in
dull the taste.
The taste, yeah.
Again, that's it says what's really happening to us, right?
Yeah.
Like you overcomplicate things, and also you desire for this too,
yeah,
right?
Yeah.
And I think this sort of desire becomes addiction, and your tongue becomes completely dull, so that you are just ever seeking more and more stimulating things, right? And you look for more and more instead of less and less.
The desires of the belly is really the art of simple living.
Yes.
It's really the art of simple living, because you're not allowing external philosophies and cultures influence you, and you're also reverting back to what nature just provides, without the spices on top.
Yes.
Which frightens a lot of people.
And we want life to be eventful. Like something to look forward to, right? That gives it that kind of excitement. But I actually also see it this way, that life itself is an event. And every moment you can make it as an event, I think.
Yep.
And that's the way to approach life without too much of a wanting and desires, I think.
Yes.
And again, that also when you go back to the basic needs, simplicity, then every little thing can be like a sip of tea. That taste of tea itself can give you enormous pleasures, right? Enormous fulfillment, so that these little things can also become events itself. We don't have to make it like parties or, go out somewhere or, doing all these extravagant things, the special things.
Yeah.
But life itself is already special, and it's for us to find it, I think.
Yeah. It's like Thoreau, right? When he went to Walden Lake and he extracted like the marrow out of life, he said, from living such a simple life, a cottage, no one around, at a lake. And so the fact of the matter is that our nature is very simple, right? And so we are easily satisfied.
Yes.
But we think we're not easily satisfied because we're brought up in the desires of the eye. But as you were mentioning, like once we strip everything back, then life itself is the event. And life itself is joyful without needing the spice and that on top. And it's interesting because in Taoist philosophy and metaphysics, the Tao gathers in emptiness. It gravitates to that which is empty. And this is one of the reasons why the Tao Te Ching and the Zhuangzi mention moderation and simplicity, because once you have a moderate life and you live a simple life and you revert back to the desires of the belly, the Tao then moves towards you. And you feel the sense of the Tao in your life. And you live in harmony with the Tao then. When you have a lot of crap sitting around in your apartment, you're busy, constantly doing this and that, you're out of touch with the Tao.
Yes.
You don't even know what it is because you're swimming against the current of the Tao, and that river just keeps sweeping you down the river. But you still fight. You're fighting. You're putting up a good fight. But again, the chase and the hunt, you'll burn out.
Yes.
You'll burn out. You'll drown in that river.
People take it burnout as in some sort of badge of honor that you've done a hard work and you're a hard worker and yeah, go for it and this and that. You've done good and this and that. But no, it's not.
No.
You don't have to. That's not part of our nature. That's not how things meant to be. We're supposed to live this simple life, and we find the little happiness from simple things that makes you intrinsically happy. And then Lao Tzu mentions that knowing the contentment of contentment, right? Can you be content? Can you be content first and foremost with yourself as you are, as who you are, not pretending to become someone or to fulfill someone else's expectation? Are you fully content with yourself as a true self? And are you content with your life that you're living, lifestyle that you have? Simple things.
Yes.
Just seriously ask those questions to yourself and deeply contemplate on it. You know.
We are easily satisfied. We don't need a lot of things. We just don't. People don't know that because they just brought up on a culture that is telling you, make sure you chase, race, hunt, and succeed, whatever that means.
Yeah.
And so what does success mean in this world? Well, it means having a big car, a big house, 1,000 kids, big bank account, and during all of that time that person burned their system out, Lao Tzu was up in his hermitage just chilling, sipping a green tea and
fully immersed in
nature.
In nature.
Yeah.
Appreciate.
While that other person was there burning their engine out.
Yeah.
They were the straight and narrow tree, while Lao Tzu was the useless tree. But guess what? The useless tree is what gives shade and shelter to all people. The straight and narrow tree is cut down in its prime. And that represents burnout. That represents a mind that is crazy, as you were mentioning before. It refers to that psychotic state of mind that unfortunately a lot of people are falling victim to in the world these days because of this chase and hunt. Money is all that's important. Wealth, fame is all that's important. You should be known. It's an attention economy. An attention economy is a fake economy.
Yes.
It's intrinsically fake, as I mentioned with the K-pop band I mentioned before.
Yes.
It's intrinsically fake. And so Taoism is about being radically genuine, being radically human.
Yes.
And that's the point of this chapter. And so what's the last two lines of what Jia Fu Feng says? So we'll finish on those two.
Okay, therefore, the wise are guided by what they feel and not by what they see. Letting go of that and choosing this.
Yes. So the sage basically chooses the desires of the belly, right?
Yeah, letting go of desires of the eye and choosing desires of the belly.
That's right.
That's what it is.
And that's, I guess, the job for all of us, isn't it?
Yes, and I just found this simple line from your article saying, returning to the home of the uncarved block, your original pure nature evokes deep contentment and allows you to live a life as nature intended it. So I thought this is really good line.
Yeah, yeah.
It
That's it, isn't
pretty
it?
much, yeah, sum up the desire of the belly
Yeah.
that we should follow.
Beautiful, beautiful. As nature intended it, right?
Yes, as nature intended it.
If only we can all live like that.
Yes. Yes.
But that's the role of everyone who is interested in, especially Eastern spirituality, particularly Taoism, is to live as nature intended it.
And again, I know it's sometimes can become difficult to get to that place, but once you get to that place, that's kind of easiest thing to do, isn't
It's
it?
the most.
You just need to be
Yeah.
yourself,
Yeah.
be it where you are, be with nature,
Yeah.
nothing else.
This is what I am. I mean, I didn't ask for this, but this is just what I have.
Exactly.
Am I going to change this to suit any other culture or to suit someone else's beliefs or insecurities about me? No. This is just...
I'm fine.
Fine. Stick to the uncarved block.
Yeah.
Shanti, shanti, shanti. Everyone's happy.
Exactly, Shanti.
All right, guys. We hope you enjoyed, and we'll see you next time.